crimes has driven illegal activities, deforestation, or contamination forced displacement. Mr. Ahiri, Boulders.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here. Sorry. Well, nice to meet you, everyone. I speak for the drug, drug regulation as directing the climate crisis between organized crime and its impact on the environment and indigenous people. The first, well, I am indigenous people, Zapoteca. My mom is Afro Mexican, so it's a good for me. So the organized crime has spawned in rural areas where deforestation and population go hand in hand with the production of a illicit substance. Indigenous people have been victims of the territorial dispossession, violence, and the destruction of other ecosystems. According to the UNIDOC World Drug Report, the production of synthetic drugs generates highlight toxic waste and aggravating the environment crisis. So the climate crisis has become an opportunity for the organized crime as changing whether partners have altered the production of legal and illegal crops, favoring the growth of criminal networks. And the impact of the drug traffic on the environment in Mexico. Well, the first, it's deforestation, drug cultivation, and the construction of a clandestine artist pride destroy forests and jungles. In Central America alone, drug traffic has been responsible for lakes of recent deforestation. And in another example, is a criminalization and militarization here in Mexico. For example, in a many areas of Mexico, the government response has involved in the militarization of territories, which has increased violence and forced displacement. Militarization has not reduced the drug traffic, but has exacerbated the social environment conflicts. The another one, in the cases in territory, um, I work in different parts of the Mexico. For example, in Chiapas, exactly is Ejido, Nueva Morelia, and San Francisco Las Parras in um, in a government to Chicomucelo in Chiapas. So in this case, it's a relationship for the meaning, social environment conflict, and over buried in the Sierra de Chiapas, and population for meaning activities, the violence, the organized crime, youth and adults forcibly recruited, the fear no longer able to continue with the project because in these territories we worked with the people. The project is the relationship with climate crisis, um, alimentary security, but in the 2000 no 2023, yeah. The organized crime, um, um, I don't know what to say. The organized crime entered to the Chiapas, so it's more difficult to the people in the Ejido Nueva Morelia and Ejido San Francisco Las Palmas. So we need to stop the projects. And later in these territories, in the topic of the drugs, we observe to the traffic of the drugs or the traffic of the person, the people. We incremented in this year. In another one, impact on indigenous people. For example, the like the different topics, climate crisis, and and another one, the climate, water, and finally, um, the drug regulation and environment. Well, in this topic, we observe in the militarization here in Mexico is not a solution. It's a contrary. We observe the violence or the traffic of drugs is incremented, but the first step for the reduce the criminalization is the regulation of the drugs. But in here, Mexico is for the utilization of the police, the community police, local police, um and the federal police. And in another one is in these topics is a necessary that is a perspective systemic because in this year, well, to for the new government is Claudia Sheinbaum, but in this government, in another governments, de Andrés Manuel López Obrador, Peña Nieto, Calderón, they not to the implement to the solutions in the policy publics and the legislation. So it's a necessary. Yeah, is the answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ayara. Finally, our next speaker is Dr. Umana. They will talk about evidence-based drug policies, environmental human rights, to end the war on drugs. Yeah, on to you, Mr. Dr. Umana. Um, is Dr. Umana on?
Hi everyone, hope you can hear me. Dr. Romana said that he would join at 12 because he's in another meeting. So you can decide if we want to pose questions to the panelists or we want to listen to from the participants.
Um, we can go with questions. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Gregory or Ayara on the presentations they just recently gave? Actually, I can start off to make it a little bit easier. Dr. Gregory, I really enjoyed your presentation. One of the things that you said was it's for environmental activists, it's one of the most dangerous, Colombia is one of the most dangerous countries. How do you see reforms when it comes to making it safer for environmental activists? Do you see more police officers taking a role or governmental agencies taking a role in helping them with security?
Well, I don't, it's hard to come up with one solution. I mean, in the histories of Colombia and why cocaine was produced there, one of the explanations is that Colombia is quite fragmented by mountains and not connected by roadways. And so and you have a diverse array of indigenous peoples with traditions and so forth. So there's probably not one master stroke to solve this problem. But I do think that one of the one of the consequences of the ceasefire, it appears in certain regions, there was a vacuum created when FARC, one of the leading guerrilla armies, laid down its arms. The vacuum was filled by um, criminal networks and paramilitaries, and that they have not been disarmed quite effectively in certain regions. And that's where environmental activists are being harmed. So I do think that uh, the solutions, I would look to the indigenous people who are speaking out and being intimidated or killed as to what they would think would be a solution in their given region. But I think the larger context has to do with the remnants of armed forces that continue to operate and were not effectively disarmed by the ceasefire of 2016. That's the problem to solve. I'm just your specific recommendation, I'm not sure that it would work everywhere. It probably would work in some places, but not others. Sorry for not being more precise and definitive in providing an answer.
No, that was a good insight. Thank you. Is there any other questions for us? I think we can wait for Dr. Umana until then. He should be here.
I was posing a question in the translation room for Dr. Gregory. Thanks for the contributions, and yeah, this is really useful to know better about the impacts in the Andean region, which is a focus nowadays for the WHO, no, with the revision of the coca leaf, etc. And an objective of this panel is to bridge what's the events going on in Vienna, the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, and what's happening in New York, for example, the General Assembly, the Security Council, no? And in previous weeks in New York, there was the third meeting of the state parties on for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And in Agora, we presented a working paper to discuss the role of illegal trafficking in the production of nuclear weapons, because we know that several regions in Latin America mainly produce minerals for energy production, like nuclear production. And illegal drug trafficking and the presence of security bodies, the militarization in the region facilitates the illegal trafficking of drugs and weapons, right? Because we know that the war on drugs is a failed policy that hasn't sufficiently addressed the illegal trafficking during all these years, right? So what can you tell about this relationship between the illegal drug trafficking and the trafficking of illegal minerals and the role of the militarized policies in all that? No, because that's an unexplored gap that the UN must be considering, right? Like what policies facilitate and drive illegal drug trafficking and illegal minerals trafficking for war? No, what we want is peace. Please go ahead, Gregory.
Well, so to make sure I understand the question, you're talking about that both that the illegal trafficking of drugs minerals such as gold and arms seem to be correlated. That's the motivation of the question. Is that correct?
From my perspective, they seem to be correlated, but I wanted to double check with the experts.
And what I think is, we call it a treadmill of destruction. Once you have a militarized competition in place, it's hard. The social organization is there. So there have been years since 2014 or so, there have been several years where it appears that armed groups in the Andes made more money off gold than they did cocaine. And in many ways, it doesn't matter. I mean, alluvial gold mining that's illegal, once it's melted in gold, it's hard to tell gold that was dirty gold from clean gold, if you will. Right? Once it's gold, it's gold, and so it's highly lootable. It's small, and it's valuable. It can be shipped, and so yes, gold. I think minerals would be an attractive. If you think of it from the vantage point of a military force, whether it's a kleptocratic or emancipatory, if you can supply the war effort from gold versus cocaine, it doesn't really matter, or the shipment of drugs in a highly violent place where there's a lot of arms, you can buy and sell drugs, and that's a problem. And there's a tendency, especially in Colombia, but this is other places around the world, and certainly in the Andes, a lot of the illegal drugs and the arms and the minerals, they're located in the borderlands, far from the capital cities, oftentimes over very rugged terrain. So it's very difficult for the central government to impose order. So yes, it's a pernicious and continuing problem. And one of the responses that's been in place for a half a century is to have the central government be more violent and more capable of inflicting violence than these armed groups, and that sets in motion the cycle of again violence, but human rights abuses. But again, my comments were specific to the environment. Increasingly, if this becomes a contestation of whose violence is more effective, nature is going to be taken hostage, and there's going to be sacrifice zones that are going to compromise nature, whether it's minerals that are lootable, drugs, or human trafficking. Whatever is being trafficked illegally is going to be highly damaging to the fabric of society, to human rights protections, and to the environment. And thinking of creative ways that are responsive to the local communities, that avoid a full militarization. And because when you militarize, you basically citizens of a country become subjects to a military power, as opposed to citizens who are capable of exercising voice. And so I think militarizing these very difficult challenges, and they're not easy. An organization that's selling drugs, that's engaged in alluvial gold mining and polluting waterways, trafficking human beings, selling drugs, they're not really nice and responsible groups. I don't want to minimize how difficult and pernicious the challenge is, but the approach that's been undertaken for a half a century has been to just militarize the central government and allies, and that cycle of violence has not produced solutions, and it has caused identifiable damage, in my opinion.
Well, thank you for your insight on that. Jorge, have you heard anything from Dr. Umana?
Not yet. And what's interesting about Dr. Romana is that he was in a government position in previous months until October from last year, I think. And it would be wonderful to have his participation, because we want to know solutions, right? Like Dr. Gregory was his participation was really useful to know what are the challenges, no, the militarized policies. No, that's the conclusion that I got from his participation. But now, How do we pass, no, from a militarized context to a peaceful environment? I don't know if like and Mexico, considering Ijari's participation, is willing to go through a pathway that will lead to peace since a few years ago, but we're stuck in the in the crossroads. Huh? So, if anyone wants to talk about that, here he is, our savior. Anusa, feel free to introduce Professor Umana, and
Yes.
please give a brief introduction to put him in context.
Finally, our next panelist is Dr. Umana. He will talk about evidence-based drug policies and environmental human rights to end the war on drugs. On to you, Mr. Dr. Umana.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I was invited to refer to the war on drugs impact on environment, and maybe I should frame it broadly as the drug issue and how it has impacted both on the side of the production and narco trafficking and the war on drugs, the environment. Mm, One of the main effects that we perceive from Colombia was the impact on the environment from the eradication policies, targeting the crops from Turbaya Yala in 1970s, that was applied in the different governments since then in the country, ended up with Santos administration that stopped, through the ruling of the Constitutional Court, the use of glyphosate on for the aerial eradication. However, we as a country will remain with land eradication of coca crops using Roundup, which remains as one of the biggest concerns is in terms of environmental policies for its impact not only on the plants and animals, but also the communities. Most of these communities, um, at least in Colombia, are located in areas of nature value and protection, and also cultural heritage lands from indigenous and Afro descendants. We can perceive that there is a broader effect on the change of location of crops and narco trafficking structures and criminal organizations. The balloon effect has caused also a big burden into the environment, and how the adaptability of criminal groups has taken many different locations, and how drug policies that don't address the issue of the market but address the issue of the production as something just located in the terms of crops, presence of crops, creates a balloon effects that is easily assimilated by criminal groups and other communities needing from this activity to broaden the space of crop cultivation, and also contributing to the deforestation of the forest. If you take the maps of Colombia and you position the deforestation indicators together with the presence of crops, it is coincidental but not as exact, meaning that the greater deforestation in the country is not happening through the existence of crops as the coca growth, but also through other illegal and legal economies, which means that the coca cultivations are just one of the contributing factors, but also means that criminal organizations are adapted through a multi-crime scenario where they can exploit the lands in very different ways through their minerals, but also the plants, but also other sorts of illegal economies. The climate change has also taken a big effect on the presence of these groups, but also the possibility of developing illegal economies. The diversification of the illegal businesses is also impacted by the climate change and the migration of different people across the continent looking for better opportunities and also for addressing the climate change issues that are mm, taking a big effect on a lot of populations, especially peasants population and other communities that are especially vulnerable in the continent. Mm, the the attack against a particular plant or particular plants and substances in the country, I guess, comes from colonial times. The idea that addressing drug trafficking by attacking biological diversity involves not only a lack of solution of the issue, but also other multiplying collateral damages into the environment that harms the communities. Mm, the steps that Colombia has taken into the rescheduling of the coca leaf, not as a dangerous substance, but as a plant that needs to be also investigated and protected in its traditional and ancestral uses by especially indigenous communities, takes that approach in the search of protecting life. The new Colombian policy called protecting life and moving away from narco trafficking recognizes the importance of a drug policy that is concerned with the wider and broader protection of life, which includes, of course, the environment, the nature, and the ways of life of communities across the country. Um, Let me just end by suggesting some possible answers to these impacts of drug policies and the war on drugs on the climate and especially the environment. Um, as an international phenomenon, the drug market should be addressed by an international policy concerned with the impacts on the environment. Maybe this could have a multi-layer approach, not only at the worldwide level, as can be perceived now in Vienna, but also in a regional way. Latin America protecting one of the most diverse environments in the world. We have countries as Brazil or Colombia, which are top three or four countries with the most biodiversity in the world need to take a step on creating a shared policy. The criminal organizations, but also some of the national policies or the drug market does not recognize the borders as much as the governments. So governments should take further steps of integration of international policies, recognizing the impacts and also addressing them all together with the issue of migration and the issue of the criminal organizations exploiting the resources in our regions. Of course, this shouldn't be taking primacy over the communitarian views or the local understandings of these impacts. It needs to be a coherent regional policy. And maybe one very important issue is that these policies need not only to take a step or go in depth into the impacts on the environments, but also the in a more holistic, integral kind of recognition of the impacts on the nature, the communities, and the ways of life of communities. This encompasses not only environmental policies, but also migratory policies and also criminal policies that allows to improve the control of these situations and these problems for the continent. Um, and finally, I guess that the bet to reclassify the coca leaf is one first step forward to start acknowledging the importance of preserving the traditional knowledge around different plants in our regions, but also the importance of finding responses to these problems, not through the eradication of the ways of life of people, but through authentic alternatives and local development according to the community's views and their life plans. This is pretty much what I wanted to say. Thank you for your patience and thank you for this very interesting exchange.
Thank you for your insight, Dr. Romana. Thank you for all of these insightful presentations. We now invite questions and discussions. Before asking a question, please introduce yourself so that we know who's speaking. Yes, so is there any other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Anusa. I'm Jorge, advocacy officer in Agora. The participation from the Professor Umana was incredible, also because it was coherent with what we expressed in previous participations, no? Like considering all the speakers' uh, speeches. uh, because a common element, like based on Professor Umana's participation, I would conclude that the policies uh, must be coherent, right? Like a criminal policy that may address different topics related to drug trafficking, to violence reduction, etc., but also migration policies, drug policies, etc. No, and another topic that was highlighted was the militarized policies, and Professor Umana was from my perspective, suggesting that a regional policy would be ideal to address all those issues, right? So my question would be how to pass, or what are the policies that could be adopted at the regional level, maybe through the Organization of American States, Mercosur. I have no idea what intergovernmental body could work, um, to shift from militarized policies, that is the common factor in the region for me, to a demilitarization strategy, like peace building policies.
Should I reply?
I don't know, Anusa, tell me, can he?
Yes. I think Jorge was directing the question towards you on this issue.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jorge, for your very important question and relevant one. I think the there are many multilateral forums that should be set in place. Is not a, a big mystery that multilateralism has been suffering these last years of a lack of efficiency with regards to most of international biggest issues. So I'm a big believer on of multilateralism as a way of conducting dialogues, even if it is not proving its best to be in its best times. OAS, CICAD has a big role on it for a regional policy that could encompass different of these anxieties and these needs of the communities. But there is not a single body that could be as comprehensive enough. I think that bilateral relations between countries, especially around different issues as protecting the Amazonian jungle or protecting the rivers, which we don't name it usually on the international relations arena, what is going on with the river Putumayo, the river Amazons, or Orinoquia, which are very important, seen as very important highways for the trafficking industry, but and suffer a lot from all these exploitation. So I guess bilateral agendas around verifiable objectives of protection with an amount of indicators that allow us to actually prove that we are making or not any progress are extremely important. The control, I totally agree with what you suggested in your question, shouldn't be just limited to military exchange. It should be broadened to academic exchange between universities, for instance. It should broaden to the migratory policies. It should be broadened to the exchange of the agencies protecting the forests and the jungles. It should be broadened to the community organizations that are that have a presence, for instance, in rivers and in zones of special influence of crops. So I believe that an horizontal exchange, bilateral, but also between not only governmental level, but also the judiciary and the community level, it's highly important to reach to a specific engagements that allow to have agreements on how to plan and how to understand these issues because natural biospheres and contexts are not limited by political borders. Um, and sometimes the political centers of the countries are very far, not only geographically, but also emotionally and they have very far concerns from what these natural environments actually require. So I guess this can be one of the strategies. I'm a strong believer on the Latin American dialogue and the possibility that we can overcome different political agendas, particular ones from every country to reach to a regional stand, a regional view of these issues that could reach to these sorts of agreements.
Thank you, Dr. Amana, for your insight. And thank you, Jorge, for the insightful question. Is there any other questions for our panelists today? If not, I wanted to thank our speakers for the valuable contribution and all participations for their engagement. Today's discussion has highlighted that addressing drug policy reforms and environmental protection together is both an urgent factor and can be achievable. So thank you so much for all of our panelists, and thank you for being part of this important dialogue. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.